This video is a tutorial for my new pattern. It's a fitted bodycon style dress with ruffled neckline and slits at the legs. This only has a few steps, so it's perfect if you're looking for a quick sewing project. To make this dress, you'll need the materials I've listed here. The serger is optional. In this specific tutorial, I didn't use one. First thing you need to do before printing the pattern, which is linked below to purchase from my Etsy shop, is to open your printer settings and check that the printing format is A4 and that the scale is either set at do not scale or scaled at 100% like I'm doing here. I've added a ruler to the top of the page so you can check that you've printed to scale. I'd recommend printing out the first page only to make sure everything is correct before printing out the whole pattern. To assemble the pattern, you need to match the indicators on the edges of the page to each other. You can do that as I'm doing here, making a straight line using my ruler to connect them, and then folding over the paper and taping them together. The way you should assemble it is in a 3-column style, so 1, 2, and 3 are next to each other, 4, 5, and 6 are next to each other, below 1, 2, and 3, and so on and so forth until you reach page 15. For the sake of saving paper, I'm only showing you with the first 3 pages, but the same would apply to the entire pattern. So assemble the entire pattern and cut it out. The fabric I'm using here is a thick stretch jersey. Since there's no lining, I'd recommend using a stretch fabric that is on the thicker side so that it doesn't show through when you're wearing it. You can see here I'm really stretching it against my knuckles and it's barely showing. I also have a flash on. It's barely showing my hand. The most important thing to note when you're picking out a fabric is that it's nice and stretchy. It stretches both ways so that the finished result will fit you as it should. Take your fabric and fold it. Place the pattern with the center front against the fold as indicated on the pattern. Mark the fabric with chalk and cut it out. I used pins here to keep the fabric from moving while I was cutting. Take your pieces and place them right sides together. Take to your sewing machine and use a zigzag stitch to connect them. Very important to use a zigzag stitch and not a straight stitch since this does need to stretch. And if you use a straight stitch, these stitches can and will rip. So use a zigzag stitch. The seam allowance is already included in the pattern and you should use a 2 cm seam allowance. Sew until you reach about 20 centimeters below the hip line and stop. The rest will leave open for the slits. Try the dress on and check the fit. Make sure that everything is fitting correctly, that you don't need to take anything in. It should fit you pretty snug, so make necessary adjustment as needed. So you're going to measure the neckline from peak to peak. Take that measurement and multiply it by 2. You're going to make a strap that is 2 centimeters wide by the length you just measured and gather it using a basting stitch. To make a basting stitch, set your machine to a straight stitch and the stitch length should be the longest your machine offers. Once you finish sewing, tie off one end and start gathering from the other until the ruffle is the same length as your neckline. Tie off the other end and even out your gathers. Take your dress with the right side facing up and begin attaching the ruffle to the neckline with pins. Take your time here and make sure that your ruffles are even. Take to your sewing machine and with a regular straight stitch, sew the ruffle to the neckline, placing the stitch along the previous basting you just did. Fold over and top stitch. I'm using my presser foot along the edge of the neckline as an indicator to help me sew a straight line. Next, you're going to measure the binding. To do that, take your measuring tape along your back, under your arms and over your shoulders as I'm doing here. Take this measurement and make a strap that is that long and 4 centimeters wide. Indicate the midpoint of the back of the dress and the strap and connect them. Going from the middle, pin the binding to the right side of the dress till each neckline peak. Sew down with 1 centimeter seam allowance. Fold the seam allowance up. Take the remaining fabric and fold towards the seam allowance and fold once again to close the binding. Add pins and continue all the way down. I'm aware that when making binding, it's common practice to pre-fold the binding and iron it down, but I don't have an iron at the moment, so this is how I do it. Feel free to use whatever method you would like. Once you have everything pinned, take to the sewing machine and sew as close to the edge as you can while still catching that fold. I would recommend you flip the dress inside out and sew from the inside to make sure you're catching the fabric. You can see here that I was constantly having to check if I'm catching the binding or not, so I would recommend to flip the dress inside out, like I just said, and sew from the inside. All that's left to do is attach the straps to the back of the dress from the inside. If you can, have someone help you place the straps where it's comfortable and sew down with a straight stitch to secure. The last step is to hem the leg slits in the hem of the dress using 2 cm seam allowance. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new releases. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Happy sewing!